Welcome to Jesus On, a look at today's issues from an eternal perspective. Pastor Zack and Pastor John will be giving us biblical insight into some of the problems the world faces today. Sit back and listen as we hear Jesus On, the problems you're dealing with right now.
Hey, my name is Zack, and this is Pastor John with me. This is Jesus On. This is a podcast about looking at relevant topics of our day and what Jesus has to say, or maybe how Jesus lived as it relates to these topics. Because Jesus came to say, he said to us, I have come that you may have life and life more abundantly. So as we follow Jesus, what we find is eternal life and abundant life. And today we're going to talk about Jesus on
busyness.
Jesus on busyness. See, I think this is relevant because it's the fall. And this is kind of when things can easily get picked up in terms of school's back in session and life can just get full and almost too full. And so let's talk about busyness. To me, busyness is bad. At least the way kind of our culture relates to busyness. And I think a couple things. One, busyness does not necessarily mean effectiveness. But yet, let me get your take on this. There seems to be this pressure that we're supposed to be busy. Like, when's the last time you asked somebody, how are you doing? And they responded, you know what, I just got way more time on my hands than I thought, and I'm just kind of coasting through life. I feel like most people, their response is, I'm just busy. I got a lot going on. So busyness is not necessarily a good thing. Busyness doesn't necessarily mean you're being effective. In fact, I think in some ways busyness can be dangerous, and Jesus might have something to say about that.
You might. Zack, I was thinking as you were speaking, I read an article not long ago in the Seattle Times where Bill Gates was talking about how he used to think about sleep. Mm-hmm. And they would get together, and it was a badge of honor to have slept the least. Whoever could get by on the least amount of sleep, because that the presumption was that they were being more effective and getting more done because they were just busier.
Yeah.
And so it really is a stereotype that we have to get past. Mm-hmm. And Jesus did talk about this. I think he talked about it in a number of ways. The classic stories about Mary and Martha, if you've read that, about Martha being so concerned about things. But to what you were saying about the danger of that, Jesus told a parable about different types of soil. Mm-hmm. And one of the soils was the soil that the seed of the gospel took root. And it started to grow, but it got choked out. And Jesus talked about the cares of the world that people become so preoccupied with, so busy with, that these things actually choke out the work of God in our lives. And we just have so much space in our life for so many things, right? Mm-hmm. And everything we do is always at the expense of other things. And so when we have our life overly crowded with the things that we're busy about, we can actually choke the work of God in our life because there's just simply not space for it.
Yeah.
And so that's the real danger is when we're just busy on all these different levels, doing all these different things. Are we missing out on the more important things that God would have us invest our life in?
I have zero scientific research, study, evidence of this, as much as this is anecdotal, of how many people I come across. One of the biggest barriers to a rich spiritual life is busyness. That's it. Mm-hmm. The desire's there, but the busyness, it chokes it out. And to me, busyness is just merely misaligned priorities that will choke out what is most important. And I think it's worth saying that a lot of the things that we're busy with are probably pretty good things.
Yeah.
But are they the best things? And are they the things that God is really calling you to? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I went about, busyness as misaligned priorities. Mm-hmm. Is Mark 1, 30, this is like in 36, 37, where the day before, Jesus, in many ways, his schedule is full. He heals all of these different people, and he's staying up late into the night, and he goes to bed, and he wakes up early, and he goes and he prays, and then his disciples come to him, and I'll just read it directly. It says, and the disciples, they found Jesus and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." In other words, come on, like, we got stuff to do, Jesus. And Jesus is like, hey, I'm spending time with my Father, priority number one. But then he says, let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came. And I think what Jesus can teach us about not being busy is find out the why. What is the why of the season you're in? What are the most significant priorities in your life? And then build your life around them. We're going to turn this whole conversation into a series of Jesus On episodes where we're going to talk about habits. We want to talk about margin and maybe some other things around this. But I think what Jesus has to say is the way that you beat busyness, or at least the starting point, is figure out what's most important and prioritize your time around that. Take this further. You had some thoughts that I thought were super helpful.
Well, just Jesus talked about how he wanted to be busy about his Father's business. And so we think about sometimes the antidote to busyness is idleness, is just doing less. But what you were saying is exactly right, I think, Zach. It's about doing the right things. Probably all of us are familiar with the analogy about putting the big rocks in first, right?
Yeah, it's a Stephen Covey, or I think it was.
Yeah, it's been different people. It's been around a while. But,
yeah.
You put the big rocks in first, and then the lesser things find their space.
Yeah.
But if you don't start with the big rocks, you fill the jar with sand first, you'll never get the important things in there to begin with. And so it really is about priorities. And it's also about setting boundaries, I think, too, about, sometimes we just feel pressure about who we should please, what we should be doing, those kinds of things, and we'll kind of get into that maybe at another time. But we're not talking about just being a slacker. In fact, Jesus talked about when he comes again, will he find his followers being faithfully busy at his work or not?
Yeah.
And so it's not about not doing things. It's about really focusing on doing the right things first and giving those the priority. And then other things have a way of sorting out.
Yeah. I think this is a good word for all of us. I know it's a good word for me as my kids' first day of school is tomorrow. And I'm thinking a word of application for all of us. What are those rocks? What are those rocks? Define those rocks. For me, the rocks, my relationship with the Lord. That is a huge rock that if that rock ain't healthy, if that rock ain't there, it's funny how everything else seems to crumble. And then I think the other rock is marriage, family, and friendships. There's really not a ton of rocks there. And so, hey, for you who are listening, what are those rocks? What are those top priorities? And are they being crowded out by busyness, or are you able to give them the priority that is needed? Well, thanks for joining us, listening in, watching Jesus On. We look forward to having you join next episode. Blessings to you.